Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Europe is on the eve of making major decisions that will shape the future of the EU and the greater continent. As the European Council gathers in Brussels on Thursday, its members will discuss not only the further financing of war-torn Ukraine, but also the future of the long-negotiated Mercosur deal with South America. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Demonstrations and scuffles in Romania and Bulgaria. A winter of discontent looms over Central Europe. And a Saudi company wants to buy Lukoil's foreign assets. Money for Ukraine and a trade deal with South America will dominate the upcoming European Council in Brussels. Will the EU find a way to unblock Russian frozen assets? And what is the future of the controversial Mercosur agreement? Our Europe correspondent Alex Cadier has to this report.
Well, it's going to be a bumper couple of days here in Brussels with all European leaders coming to town for that European Council meeting. Top of the agenda, of course, funding Ukraine in the face of Russia's invasion, keeping Ukraine in the fight. The main proposal from that European Commission behind me was a loan based on Russia's frozen assets, the majority of which are held here in Belgium. For now, Belgium is still saying no. That's according to officials just in the last few hours. They want the entirety of that loan, the liability linked to that loan, to be covered in full by all member states. The other member states say that is not a realistic prospect, and therefore Belgium continues to say no. The only other option would be collective debt. That is what Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, said earlier today.
One based on assets and one based on EU borrowing, and we will have to decide which way we want to take, which route we want to take. But one thing is very, very clear. We have to take the decision to fund Ukraine for the next 2 years in this European Council.
So negotiations over that loan, over how to fund Ukraine over the next few years, will go down to the wire. Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, gathering the leaders, say he will keep them here as long as it takes. If it has to go into the weekend, it will. Another issue not on the agenda of the European Council, but still very much front of mind for so many member states, will be the EU's deal with Mercosur countries, a trade deal which would remove progressively many trade barriers with those countries to allow freer trade between the EU and Mercosur. Now, the French government has said they want to see a delay in the process. They do not want Ursula von der Leyen to go to Brazil to sign off on this on Sunday. And in the last few hours, Italy also lending its voice. We know that Poland and others have been opposed, but the heft of Italy coming behind certainly could delay, if not scupper, this deal. The concern from France and Italy is that this deal could hurt farmers. Experts I've been speaking to say those concerns are ill-founded.
The numbers, the past experiences show that there is no reason to be afraid, and that Europe has very high standards, but these high standards are a protection for us, a protection against imports. And we have a very strong agri-food sector.
So on the agenda or not, this will be a very, very difficult week for the European Union. They have to figure out how to fund Ukraine in its fight for the next few years against Russia. They also need to figure out whether or not they want to sign off on a trade deal that was 20 years in the making. Of course, all of that will be to play for in the next few days. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
Romanians are protesting the captured judiciary, but some see these protests as a sign of rising dissatisfaction stemming from the austerity measures imposed this year by the government of Ilie Bolojan. While in neighbouring Bulgaria, emotions are flying high in response to next year's controversial budget. Our Balkans correspondent Paweł Traskowski reports.
This is a border crossing between Romania and Bulgaria on January the 1st this year. Both countries celebrate becoming full members of the visa-free Schengen zone 18 years after they joined the European bloc. The year's end is far less jubilant though. In Romania, protests are entering their second week now, following the release of a documentary titled Captured Justice. The 2-hour-long piece, with almost 5 million views now, shows what is supposed to be systemic corruption within the Romanian justice system.
We are protesting for a fair judiciary, a judiciary for all.
But captured courts might be a catalyst for general dissatisfaction.
People are discontent, but I would dare say that it's mostly economic discontent, and the judicial factor can play a role, but it's not the primary, let's say, issue of concern for Romanians right now.
This economic discontent stems largely from the austerity measures that the government of Ilie Bolojan had to introduce in autumn to tackle Romania's soaring budget deficit.
It was a difficult year. We also started to feel the austerity, and considering the latest images, I am outraged that I am affected by austerity and that people with a lot of power get away with it.
The fragile Big Tent coalition that formed after the presidential election endures, but with pressure from the hard-right opposition in the parliament and growing discontent in the streets, Romania is to enter the next year rocking. Not unlike neighboring Bulgaria, whose parliament saw some unparliamentary scenes today. This is part of budget negotiations. The proposed 2026 budget is one reason why thousands have taken to the streets this month.
In this budget, we have taxes which supposedly no one was going to raise. And it turns out we're raising taxes. Surprise.
This eventually contributed to Rosen-Żeliaskov's government stepping down, making room for the 10th government since 2020. But even without the government in place, the budget for next year should be passed, and its revised version still causes altercations.
We witnessed the most brazen vote in this National Assembly. For the fourth time, the ruling parties are trying to push through the thieving budget.
And it seems that more opposition is yet to come, with protests scheduled for Thursday. All the while, there is a faint chance that a new coalition will be formed. Therefore, most likely in Bulgaria,
the 8th general snap election in 5 years will be scheduled next year.
Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
So it's a winter of discontent in Central Europe. People are taking to the streets in Lithuania and Hungary as well, with a major demonstration having taken place on Wednesday in Slovakia against the government's decision to abolish the country's whistleblower's office. Andrew Sweeney reports.
Thousands took to the streets of Slovakia to protest the government's decision to abolish the country's whistleblower's office. Thousands attended the main protest in the country's capital, Bratislava. Others voiced their opposition to the government in cities including Košice, Prešov and Banka Bystrica. According to the leader of the opposition Progressive Slovakia party, Michal Šimečka, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, is leading his country back into what he described as mafia rule.
They took a chainsaw to the rule of law. Slovakia is the only country where the government approves laws to make life easier for criminals and mafia.
The decision by the government to abolish the whistleblower's office set up to support those who want to expose corruption in state organisations may prove to be more unpopular than expected, according to Martin Slinar, a previous defence minister of Slovakia. Some of the government's key voters may well abandon it over this decision.
People are not satisfied with the way that that things are going. We see actually quite a significant number of voters of the current coalition leaving the coalition.
However, Slovakia has been no stranger to protest in recent months. The so-called chalk revolution, where students have drawn messages in chalk outside their classrooms and schools condemning Fico for his pro-Russian policies, has spread across the country after starting in the small city of Poprad. And Slovakia is not the only country experiencing protests at the moment. In Lithuania, people are demanding the government halt its efforts to reform the state broadcasting company over fears that this represents a critical attack on freedom of speech in Lithuania.
The public is constantly being stirred up and the council has problems with the administration. This leads nowhere. Society is being polarised one way or another and the problem needs to be addressed.
The government says that the reforms are administrative in nature and that the whole situation has been blown out of proportion, whereas protesters say this represents a real threat to Lithuanian freedom of speech.
We cannot take part in this criminal activity that is taking place in Parliament today, where issues so vital to our democracy and to the development of our country are being pushed through by a bulldozer. Freedom of speech is freedom itself, and if we do not defend it, we will face threats to the development of our independent, law-based state.
In Budapest, Hungary's capital, on Saturday, December 13th, tens of thousands took to the street to protest at what they said is a criminal cover-up of child physical and sexual abuse in Hungary's schools, in its care homes and its juvenile detention facilities, a scandal that has been ongoing for some time and threatens the rule of Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his Fidesz party. Despite Christmas coming up soon, it may well be a winter of discontent for some countries in Central and Eastern Europe. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
The Saudi energy company Midad is the highest bidder in acquiring the Russian oil giant Lukoil's foreign assets. Maciej Wilowski investigates the potential implications of the purchase for war-torn Ukraine.
There's a new top bidder for Lukoil's international assets whose good standing with Washington could make its bid successful. That company is Saudi Arabia's Midad Energy, a private energy firm with ties to both Washington and Moscow.
There is a huge chance that Midad offer will be accepted, as there is a strong lobby from the Saudi Arabian government in Washington. And considering very good, sometimes even cordial relations between MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and President Trump,
the U.S., under the second Trump administration, has pushed for closer ties with Saudi Arabia, signing multi-billion-dollar deals in energy, technology, and defense. Those deepening ties could help Saudi Arabia's Midad Energy in its bid for Lukoil's foreign assets, as any purchase would require U.S. approval. However, Midad's ties to Moscow could undermine the very sanctions that the U.S. imposed on Lukoil in October, giving the Russian oil giant plenty of maneuvering room.
It would provide Lukoil a partner which is not affected, which cannot be affected by the sanctions. That's a huge problem for United States decision makers.
The sanctions, which took effect on November 21st, led to a scramble by Lukoil to unload the company's $22 billion portfolio of international assets comprised of oil fields, refineries, and gas stations. One of the first bidders was Swiss commodity trader Gunvor, which withdrew its bid in early November after the U.S. Treasury Department called it a Kremlin puppet.
Lukoil is looking for buyers, and we've already heard that it is not able to sell it to people that are somewhat connected with the Kremlin, like the Gunvor company, which was selling Russian oil for a decade.
The lack of progress in securing a buyer has sparked concern in countries like Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria, where Lukoil-owned refineries supply a large share of the country's energy needs. If approved, a Midad purchase of Lukoil's foreign assets could have geopolitical significance, solidifying Saudi Arabia's role as a mediator between Russia and the West.
If Midad Energy bid will be accepted, it will level up the position of Saudi Arabia at the same time on the oil market and at the political scene.
That role was put on full display earlier this year when U.S. and Russian diplomats met in Riyadh in February to discuss closer bilateral ties and an end to the war in Ukraine. Despite the effort to end the war, no Ukrainian or European officials were invited to attend. A Midad purchase of Lukoil's foreign assets could end the weeks-long uncertainty, but could also give the Russian oil giant a way to bypass the U.S. sanctions. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
Lithuania debunks German ruling coalition politicians' claim that Russia has deployed 360,000 soldiers in neighboring Belarus. According to Belarusian opposition military experts, no more than 2,000 Russians are stationed today in the country. Anastasia Yanchenko has this report.
What we are currently witnessing is that Russia has stationed two army corps, roughly 350,000 to 360,000 combat-ready soldiers in Belarus. This is causing concern, particularly in the Baltic states.
Speaking to German broadcaster NTV, Roderich Kiesewetter, a foreign policy expert from Germany's CDU party, warned of an imminent threat to NATO's eastern flank due to the reported presence of significant numbers of Russian troops in Belarus. However, just as quickly as alarming media headlines and their claims spread through Germany and across Europe, it was just as swiftly dismissed in the Baltics, particularly in Lithuania.
It's not possible because to deploy 360,000 troops, it is very high visibility event. Yes, even 10,000 if you move, it is visible, and all NATO intelligence definitely will recognize it.
The Belarusian independent investigative organization Belpol also denied the lawmaker's statement, saying that while Russian troops are present on Belarusian soil, their numbers are roughly 180 times lower than claimed.
As of today, the number of Russian military personnel on the territory of the Republic of Belarus does not exceed 2,000.
The joint Russian-Belarusian military drills Zapad 2025, held in September, saw less soldiers participate than initial reports indicated. Fewer than 13,000 personnel from both nations took part in the exercise, far below roughly 200,000 troops called on for Zapad 2021. In response to the drills in September, Poland and Lithuania had closed its borders with Belarus. NATO even went as far as to run their own military drills, dubbed Iron Defender.
Currently, Russia is suffering heavy losses in Ukraine and simply cannot deploy 360,000 troops from its territory to Belarus. Even the planned Zapad 2025 exercises were not as large as initially intended.
Nevertheless, despite the fact that there is no active or immediate armed threat from Russia or Belarus, an indirect threat remains ever present.
They are terrorizing by drones Estonia, Poland, including railway diversions in the Baltic Sea, cutting off those cables, illegal migrants, which are still being organized, to enter Lithuania and Polish borders.
However, NATO is fully aware of the threats posed by Russia and has responded by creating a new initiative, stretching Europe's eastern flank led by Poland and Finland.
Finally, Europe understands that eastern border, protection of our eastern border is our common responsibility.
Complementary efforts include Poland's Eastern Shield project, which is meant to fortify its borders with Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, as well as the Baltic Defense Line, a joint defensive zone being developed by Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania along their borders with Russia and Belarus.
German soldiers in Lithuania will soon have a new home. Some 3,800 troops to be deployed there by 2028 will be permanently located in the biggest military complex in the Baltic states' history. Aisha Bache reports.
This may not look like much, but soon it will be Lithuania's largest military complex ever built.
There is no doubt that the project will continue successfully because ensuring Allied acceptance in terms of infrastructure is one of the key components of Lithuania's security strategy. It is not only about weaponry and the military, which are of course very important, but also allies who ensure our resilience and ability to defend ourselves.
Valued at nearly €2 billion, the Rudninkai military town will span 190 hectares. By 2027, the German Army's 45th Armored Brigade should be able to call the complex home.
This barracks is very important for us, because it will be home, our home, my soldiers' home. Roughly 3,800 German soldiers will be here in this barracks by hopefully the end of 2027. And it's very good that we have this barracks, good training possibilities here, because this will send a strong message of deterrence.
The ambitious project strengthens NATO's eastern flank at the strategically crucial Suwałki Gap. The area connects the Baltic states with Poland and is flanked by Russia's Kaliningrad and Belarus on either side. Officials previously said the area could potentially be seized by Moscow and its ally Minsk in the event of a military conflict.
By stationing the 45th Armor Brigade in Lithuania, we are providing a credible deterrent, a deterrent that we did not want. But taking responsibility is also important because the US will be concentrating on the Pacific region. As European NATO states, we must therefore take more responsibility for defending ourselves.
The permanent relocation of around 5,000 German soldiers was decided in 2023. These soldiers are planned to be based in Rudningai and Rukla. And beyond weapons and military equipment, the project reinforces Lithuania's readiness and sends a clear signal of deterrence to potential threats. For TVP World, Aisha Badja.
The latest peace proposal for Ukraine raises questions not only in Moscow, as its provisions remain unclear even to some of its signatories. What role does the US want to play in the post-war reality? Will Europe send its peacekeepers there? And finally, will Russia agree to sign it? To talk about it, we're joined by Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, in your opinion, what could be the actual shape of US security guarantees for Ukraine? Because Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk claims that Washington is ready to use force to protect Ukraine.
Well, that's good news if that's in fact the case. Trump is speaking to the American public tonight, and it's going to be a sweeping speech about everything, from affordability to what he's doing in Venezuela and presumably Ukraine. So we may have some hints there as to what he's doing, but there's basically 4 issues that have been discussed in Berlin between Ukraine and the Europeans with the Americans as well. There's talks in the U.S., and, they seem to be making progress. President Zelensky said they are about 90% agreement on all of the important topics. The first one, of course, is NATO membership. And NATO membership is, Ukraine is already a de facto member of NATO, in my opinion. Not being in NATO is okay because they have talked about security guarantees. And this would be to allow boots on the ground from European countries, perhaps the United States, and it's sort of an Article 5, attack on one is an attack on all, for them to go in and provide security guarantees if a deal is signed to protect Ukraine, all of what's left of Ukraine. The other, of course, issue is money and frozen funds, and that seems to have made headway. The Europeans look like they're in agreement to send the frozen funds to Ukraine, and the piece of Donetsk that is now in dispute that Russia wants, even though it doesn't occupy it, is something also that has been dealt with by these various talks that are underway. And the Americans have proposed that this area, it's about a third of Donetsk, is about the size of the state of Connecticut, would be a free enterprise zone. And Ukraine has said, well, that's okay, but if we withdraw our troops from that area, so does Russia have to, and that sort of thing. So all of these talks converged, I think, recently, and has put the ball in Russia's court. Unfortunately, the latest is that Putin absolutely disavowed any interest at all in giving up Donetsk and said, we want Donetsk, and if we don't get it given to us by Ukraine, we will occupy it militarily. So he's put a stop to it. That puts the ball back in the court.
Right. Well, let's say that the ball is actually in Russia's court, as Ukraine's President Zelensky claims that, as you said, 90% of the document is ready, and that Russia shall receive the final version of the peace proposal in the next 2 days. Now, knowing the history of the past 4 years, how long do you think it will take Vladimir Putin to respond to this proposal?
He's already responded to the Donetsk piece. and said he doesn't want a free enterprise zone. He wants that territory, and if he isn't given it, then he's just going to continue fighting and conquer it. Ukraine's position on the Donetsk piece is maybe free enterprise, but if we withdraw, they have to withdraw, and it has to have a security guarantee. And, and Putin has kiboshed that. This is very dangerous for Russia now, I think, because there's been a lot of work done by the Americans, the Europeans, and Ukrainians. They have met their minds in many respects. They've been really diligent in working toward this. And for Putin just to dismiss it out of hand is going to annoy Trump. And that may hopefully cause Trump to to flip out and to impose more leverage on Russia in the form of sanctions or whatever else, oil caps, whatever else he can do. I think now that Russia has, dismissed it out of hand, means that that could be a trigger for the U.S. to do more.
Right. Now, there's this new bipartisan bill in the American Senate, which basically imposes sanctions on anyone who deals in Russian oil. But I'm wondering whether this bill is there because peace negotiations are accelerating at the moment, and Donald Trump needs it to have a leverage over Vladimir Putin, or is it maybe that he will not use it after all? Well, we know what happened with sanctions imposed on Lukoil and Rosneft. They were partially lifted.
Well, he's a puzzle, and he's enigmatic and he's erratic, and I think he's very emotional about a lot of things. Look, he wants to wrap this up. This is going to be his big Christmas present. This is his Nobel Peace Prize. If he can pull this off, he's dedicated a lot of people and a lot of time to this. And I think that if Putin just rejects it out of hand and so on, I think that he's asking for some real serious leverage to be imposed on his companies and on his oil industry. And at least I'm hoping so, because that would be a snub that would be, one too many. Totally unreasonable.
And yet today he stated that to reach a peace deal with Europe under the current leadership is, well, quite unlikely. Therefore, I'm wondering whether this is a message sent to his American counterpart to once again try to sideline Europe in peace negotiations and to reach the agreement directly between Moscow and Washington.
Look, one of Putin's strategies has been to divide the alliance that is in favor of Ukraine winning this war, and he's done a good job. And of course, Trump plays into his hands because he has a deep-seated dislike for European political leadership up to now. He's got to start to realize and start to respect that Europe is really getting its act together with money and with effort and militarizing, and it's very rich. And so, he's also going to school on this. So it's very important that this exercise has gone this far, and I wouldn't discount the possibility that Trump will and all of his bad mouthing of Ukraine for causing the war and Europe for being weak are also just efforts to push some kind of agreement, because at the end of the day, the Americans are kind of on the sidelines, and it's really about Europe, Ukraine, and Russia making a deal.
I see your point there. Well, you said that it's quite possible that Ukraine will receive Russian money, Russian frozen assets will be used to support Ukraine. Well, this scenario seems quite unlikely at the moment because of the Belgian veto on the matter. Now, Ukraine claims that it needs, Ukraine and the EU, they claim that the country needs roughly 135 billion euros to survive 2026 and 2027. If Europe fails to use the frozen Russian assets, do you think that Kiev eventually will get the money some other way?
Well, I think the European Commission has said that they will start to allocate out of the EU itself the money and use the frozen Russian assets as a sort of collateral for the loans. Use it as a loan that they'll use the frozen assets as collateral if Russia sues, and they will lose the right to prevent them from seizing the assets. It's very sticky, and it's a very a delicate legal situation. But I think really the Europeans have no choice but to finance Ukraine, because Ukraine is their police force against Putin, and they will do that somehow. And so that's very important. The boots on the ground is another issue that I think they've made some gains on. And I think that, look, Trump wants this fixed. He doesn't want any more of this. And he thinks it's not a problem, but he's trying to be the good guy fixing it. And let's hope he does. Ukraine is also not stopping either. It's decimating oil assets that Russia has. It's just blown up a submarine with sea drones. And the other thing that's important to note, and this is a commitment on the part of Europe, that Britain has seized the money that Abramovich raised by selling the Chelsea Football Club, and he's going to give that £2.5 billion to Ukraine. Abramovich owned that team with Putin. So in other words, he's taking the money that the British are confiscating the money from that asset and giving it to Ukraine. They will find all kinds of other ways to do that and seize assets that the Russians have here and there throughout the European area.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews and news here on TVP World.